Our worst enemy. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews up in New York. Let me start tonight with the United States going after ISIS in Syria. Can the president sell this war? Can we, if we get in this fight, avoid the obvious fact that we would be helping destroy the greatest danger facing the Syrian government? Would a bold stroke against ISIS put us in bed with Bashar Assad, the man Barack Obama wisely or not swore he would get rid of? Well, tonight we look at the revoltant development facing our American president. How to choose the greater evil. A fanatical, bloodthirsty terror group or a dictator who has shown he will do anything to save himself. Howard Fineman's editorial director of the Huffington Post, and Bobby Ghosh is managing editor of the digital publication Quartz. According to NBC News, the United States is flying surveillance missions over Syria, an action authorized by President Obama this weekend to assess targets for potential airstrikes against ISIS. They are using both manned and unmanned aircrafts for the purpose. U.S. officials say they will not seek approval from the Assad government. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is drafting plans for potential strikes against the terror group. The president hasn't okayed strikes in Syria yet, but NBC News reports that decision could come as early as this week. The strikes would target ISIS forces, weapons, and supply lines between Syria and Iraq. And today, President Obama once again talked about the need for rooting out the cancer that is ISIS. And he warned it won't be easy and it won't be quick. Speaking at the American Legion National Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, he had this to say about the killers of American journalist James Foley. Let's watch.
But our message to anyone who harms our people is simple. America does not forget. Our reach is long. We are patient. Justice will be done. We have proved time and time again we will do what's necessary to capture those who harm Americans, to go after those who harm Americans. And we'll continue to take direct action where needed to protect our people and to defend our homeland.
Well, there we go. Howard, I never liked that word homeland. To me, it's civil defense. It's America. That's neocon talk anyway. But homeland, he's talking about us defending ourselves against ISIS in America. How drastic is that? Do you believe that threat or is that something to justify national action against some other country because he doesn't have any statutory authority to go into Syria? Is that why he's saying to ward off a possible threat to us at home here?
Well, I thought it was significant that he mentioned the homeland, that distasteful word that is part of our modern language, Chris. But I think the president is trying to contain his public commitment, because if he really starts talking about ISIS's threat to the homeland, if he really starts talking in, if you will, 9/11 and post-9/11 terms, then that amps up his responsibility and the urgency to take ISIS not only as a threat in the region, not only as a group against whom we have to seek retribution for the killing of an American journalist and others, but he has to explain to the American people why this group over there is a global threat to us here, and that automatically takes him further down the road to military commitment than he wants to go. So the mention of the homeland that he said there, I don't think is as important as what he's trying to limit. The question, of course, is whether he can do it once he steps down that road.
Well, Bobby Ghosh, the question in the region is this: how can we attack ISIS, the #1 threat right now, I believe, you check me on this, to the Syrian government of Bashar Assad, who he said a year ago he wanted to get rid of, at the same time destroy effectively ISIS? That makes Assad looks like a pretty stable government.
Well, it is a hard choice to make between the two evils, but there might be a third way. You don't simply go against ISIS. You simultaneously, and there are indications from the administration that they're thinking of this, you simultaneously arm the Free Syrian Army and improve the support to them. This is the non-religious, the more secular anti-Assad group that began their uprising against Saddam 3 years ago. They were overtaken by ISIS because they were ignored. They did not get the support that they asked asked for early on. It's time to increase the support to them, at the same time going after ISIS. Now, it'll create going after ISIS, if it is successful, will create an opening, and Assad will gain temporarily, but not for very long, I think. If the Free Syrian Army and the other non-religious groups that are fighting against Assad are empowered, then they have shown that when they have the chance, that they can take the fight to Assad.
Let me talk in American gut terms, Bobby, and you share them. Let me hear them. Maybe you disagree with me. When the American people watched that execution, that beheading of an American last week, they watched that man with tremendous guts and fortitude to stand out there knowing he was on camera, knowing his family would see it, knowing he was going to die in a matter of minutes, knowing it was going to be done by a knife at his neck, and he stood there and took it. And the American people are either going to react positively to that or not. They're either going to get even with the people who did that or they are not. Or they're going to cook up some other excuse to go to war with ISIS, like they're a threat to our homeland. Why don't we behave anymore like a gut country behaves and says, no, you don't do this to our people. We're going to make you pay for this. The American people would understand that language. They'd say it doesn't have to do with the Sunni and the Shia and what the hell's going over in Iraq or Mesopotamia or whatever we're calling it now, if it is a country. They don't care about rebuilding Iraq and putting together the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Shia. That's been, the American people don't have, but they do have time with defending our honor. And I don't understand why he's now talking about the homeland and changing the subject. He went off playing golf last week when he had the American people's attention. That execution had our attention. Then he flips off, comes back a week later, all dressed up. He's taking his shower. He's back in his business suit. And now he's talking about some threat to the homeland. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound real. It sounds like a legal excuse to go after somebody. He should normally just say, damn it, you Republicans, you get in my way. I dare you to stop me from going after the guy who killed our guy. Go ahead, call for a vote, and I'll kill you on the vote. But I don't understand why he doesn't fight like a street fighter when it comes to defending the lives of Americans. I believed him when he said that last week, how it hurt him personally.
Yes, I've been mystified about this myself, as have lots of other people. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where the president was describing ISIS as the JV team, and within a couple of months, they're the greatest threat to the United States. There's also a problem here in framing this so narrowly as they're a threat to the American homeland. We've talked about this before, Chris. You don't have to come to the American homeland to hurt Americans. Jim Foley was not in the American homeland. There are thousands of Americans much closer to where ISIS operates, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Turkey. There are American allies in Europe, and Turkey is a NATO partner. There are lots of ways to hurt America, and ISIS has said over and over again that it wants to hurt America without coming to the homeland. So if you frame this very narrowly as, well, we're going to take action because we think they're coming to the homeland, that gives you wriggle room. That gives, as we've seen already, General Dempsey say, well, we don't have evidence that they are threatening the homeland. Well, they're threatening America, and America is not simply the homeland. It just
sounds like the talk we got coming in and pushing us into the Iraq War in the first place. Anyway, NBC News today reported that this man, Douglas MacArthur McCain, was killed this weekend in Syria fighting for ISIS. He's from Minnesota. In Twitter posts, he said he, quote, reverted, that's his word, to Islam back in 2004. This spring, he traveled to Turkey and eventually made his way into Syria. He's one of a small number, a handful actually, of Americans who have gone to fight for the terror group over there. Howard, put it together. There's three reasons for us to be fighting ISIS. One is they're a bloodthirsty mob of killers, and Bobby Ghosh has explained it better than I could ever, and what they're sort of mad dogs, if you will, going after people to kill them, the joy of doing that. Or we want to rebuild Iraq, which to me is an illusion, a delusion perhaps, or we want to protect them from the homeland. My question is, why did he pick the blood target, the one that most Americans would react to, instead of, well, the other ones, but I'm not sure they really are goals anymore? Your thoughts?
Why doesn't who
the president.
Sorry. Well, I think the president is stuck on his previous promises in the whole shape of his career in his presidency to try to avoid the whole troops on the ground notion. And yet at the same time, as Bobby was pointing out, he has to quickly shift from describing ISIS as the JV team to a huge threat that requires American planes in the sky, drones, cooperation with unsavory people in the region to achieve what he
where are you on
is saying is limited objectives. Where am I on that?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, Chris. I think if the president had ever had a chance to strike back firmly and quickly and decisively without necessarily requiring him to engage in a long war in that region.
Yeah.
To make a point to the world, to make a point to the people we've been fighting. Last week would have been it. But it's not in President Obama's nature. It's not in his nature. He's proud of the fact that he is Mr. Cool, that he supposedly takes a long time to measure and decide in sort of implacable, slow-moving measures. Well, that wasn't that kind of situation the other week. I think politically, I think he may have missed the moment in terms of his ability to do that now. I don't think it adds up right now. But you know what? I'm sorry to say that wasn't the last act of cruelty we're going to see on a YouTube video in the weeks ahead.
Let me go back to Bobby on the Eastern view from over there, looking at us. You know, they used to say that the West always covers its retreat with artillery. We fire a lot of artillery or stand-back weapons, and we get out of there. And they can tell we're getting out of there. Is airstrikes? Do they send the message we're on the attack, or do they suggest we're in the retreat? In other words, if we're up there shooting from the air but not getting on the ground, are we suggesting to the ISIS people, don't worry, air power can't do that much, you'll outlive this, and by the way, it's cowardly to do it this way, until we catch one of your pilots, of course.
Well, airstrikes are a start. They can't be the final solution. They're a start if they halt the momentum. Right now, the big problem in that area is that everybody around looks at ISIS. Ordinary Iraqis and ordinary Syrians look at ISIS and they see them both as an irresistible force as well as an immovable object. What we can do with airstrikes is shatter that myth. We've already done that in Mosul, where we pushed ISIL back, and that sends the message that these guys can be beaten when they come up against Syria's force. Now the next part of the challenge, in addition to airstrikes, is going to have to be to get ground forces in operation. Now, the president has said over and over again, no American troops. Fine. There are Iraqi troops that need to be stood up. There are the Peshmerga in Kurdistan. There are the Free Syrian Army in Syria. There are different elements that can be strengthened, should be strengthened, and there are some signs that the administration is beginning to strengthen them. Well, it's a long fight. It's not something that's going to happen quickly.
I just wondered, do you think, Bobby, that this guy, what's his name, Douglas MacArthur McCain, do you think he's in the company of the 72 virgins right now? Is this what he was looking for?
Well, there's nothing that we've learned about him so far that suggests that that's what he was looking for. He was clearly looking for, there was something missing from his life. He seemed to have an otherwise fairly ordinary life in the United States. There was clearly something missing. I've always thought that it's possible that when he first went there, he went there thinking that he was going to participate in something noble and then got sucked into something worse. That's often the case with people like him. They get drawn into a conflict thinking they're going to do something meaningful with their lives. They're going to help the helpless, and then once they get there, they get brainwashed. They sort of it's a slide down a slippery slope.
Howard, thank you for joining us. Howard Fineman, as always. Bobby Ghosh, as always. Coming up, rescuing hostages before he was taken.